Hey everyone, Yoyston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today, I am joined once more by the Anarian to my Isildur. Royen, how are you, man?
Good. I'm doing great.
I wanted to play off of our Eladon and Elrohir one last time, so...
Very nice.
Yeah. Happy Hobbit Day, everybody. Happy Hobbit Day to my friends out there, and thank you all for being here and for joining. Like, every year we try to do some extra video conversation, something for Hobbit Day and Tolkien Reading Day. And thanks to my other YouTube friends, there's going to be a link in the play or a link to the playlist in the description below and in the cards for the other videos attached to this year's playlist. So thank you to them as always. Thanks to an elf friend for setting this up. Now, Royen, today we have an interesting topic. I want to shout out really fast before we get to it. Shout out to Ralph Damiani for creating the artwork that you all are seeing in this video. I commissioned it as a gift for my father on Father's Day this year. Absolutely love it. It's Bilbo and Frodo having a drink at the Green Dragon. So please check out his art in the description below. Yeah, I absolutely love it. So thanks again.
We love commissioning the arts.
Absolutely. He's one of, if not like my favorite Tolkien artists. So he's awesome. Really go check out his work. And now on to our conversation for today. So I decided let's run it a lot like our normal podcasts. If you guys like our live streams, if you liked our Rings of Power reviews from last year in 2022, all that kind of stuff, we do a podcast on Patreon and on our YouTube memberships every month. That's very similar to this. So wanted to give you all a little bit of a taste of what that's like. So today, a topic that has been on my mind maybe for a year or two. I think we may have discussed it a little bit on a previous podcast. It's heroism of hobbits. It's how Tolkien portrays hobbits as virtuous, but as a different kind of virtuous than many other characters. We'll break down what all of that means and everything, but this idea has been on my mind even since I had the great pleasure to interview Billy Boyd and Dominic Monaghan. I asked them some question of along the lines of how does the archetype of a Hobbit hero play in today's culture, right? They're not this superhero. They're not anything like that, right? And they gave me a very interesting answer, so I'll link that discussion also in the description and cards. But Royen, I kind of want to ask you the same question, and we'll dive into this conversation. Hobbits are definitely portrayed as different sorts of heroes than many others we get. There's almost like this sense of pride in them being on the lazier side of things, on the less in shape side of things, which is in total contrast to most heroes we have in modern and historic culture. So what are your thoughts just innately on the heroism of hobbits?
Yeah, I mean, let's take a minute to try to define like the differences between, I think that'll help a lot in the rest of this discussion. So I guess what I see when we're talking about like this difference between Hobbit heroes and the rest of, fantasy and fiction more or less is when you come to, I mean, let's just stay within the universe of Lord of the Rings. Yoyston, you were mentioning before we started recording the differences between like a character like Aragorn, who is the greatest of men. He's larger than life. He has this incredible destiny and legacy that, is hung on his shoulders from the moment we are introduced to him, really. And contrast that to our four hobbits of the Fellowship. Now, Frodo is a little bit different because he does have some sort of legacy with Bilbo, but everybody else is a new introduction. And when we talk about hobbits, like you were mentioning, there's definitely a level of, for the rest of the Shire, there's a lot of, fat, lazy hobbits, really enjoys the food, the drink, and the partying, and the relaxation, the easygoing life, more so than what we see with the other heroes in the story, these people who are in constant hardships, the people who are constantly fighting, the evils every day. And this kind of goes into like what Gandalf says, with like, it's the little things that seem to make the difference with the hobbits. And so, in my opinion, there's a huge amount of fantasy stories that are centered around the idea of a chosen one, from Harry Potter to the Wheel of Time to King Arthur. All of these things are about a hero who is greater than everybody else for a reason that is outside of their actions. It's something that was ordained before them.
Yeah. Yep.
And
it was chosen. Yeah.
Yeah, they are the chosen one.
Mm-hmm.
Tolkien kind of tossed that out the window when he started. And I do think that this kind of, I don't actually know too much about the kinds of stories in like Norse mythology and stuff like that, Norse traditional history. But I feel like it's less prevalent. The chosen one is slightly less prevalent there than it would be in like Greek myths.
Mm-hmm.
And Tolkien kind of ran with that. I mean, in The Hobbit, his first published like story, Bilbo is not the chosen one. He is the last person who gets kind of, shoved into this expedition. And he's the most different, sure, because he's a completely different race. Yeah. But aside from that, his defining quality is that he's a hobbit. That's kind of it.
Absolutely.
There's no prophecy. There's no, I guess you could say there's a wizard who's helping him along, but it's not because Gandalf has known him since a child and has always seen some, greatness hidden behind his eyes and his innate spirit. No, it's because Gandalf was like, I need a burglar.
Yeah.
Let me go find this guy. He's small, easy to be lost in the chaos.
Yeah.
So that is something that Tolkien added to fantasy. Add is not a great word, but he definitely popularized in fantasy. And I do think it's slightly more prevalent in today's works. Although like modern fantasy works, there's still a lot of like, chosen one stuff like that. And some stories even have multiple protagonists that are kind of, all of the above. For instance, Game of Thrones has Daenerys, who is almost as prophesized can be, Stormborn, the Breaker of Chains, all these things.
Yep.
And
all these titles and so forth.
And then you have all the other characters that are mostly like, big people in society, except for Jon, who is a bastard. Now, I'm not going to get into L plus R equals J, but because that's technically not canon yet.
Not yet. Yeah.
Well, we'll see. I don't know. Back to the Lord of the Rings. So for me, the actual main thing that I'm going to talk about is that there are in our lives today in history, you hear about them on the news. There are these people that seem larger than real life. These people who have been given these great opportunities and they've seized upon them, and they're now known as great people for whatever reason. Through their own bravery or their own abilities or whatever. I mean, I'm not just talking about people who make the news for saving someone's life in an accident or something, but, even sports stars, popular, people on the internet or musicians and stuff like that. All these people, they seem larger than life because they're famous in a way.
Yeah.
The Hobbit and the heroism and the idealism that Tolkien kind of pushes onto the four Hobbit characters, I think was more intended to be relatable to the average person, less so than Aragorn or, any of the other Fellowship, really, all these like
that's
great warriors. I mean, how many people in real life have an opportunity in their lives to show off a warriorship? Unless you're joining the military, fighting people is generally illegal in most places in the world.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
So even if you work out like a ton, you're not doing that so that you can go, unless, you're not doing that so you can legally go and just fight people for fun, unless, you're doing it for a sport, I guess. But the Hobbits,
that's fair.
They seem to be the traits that are idealized is taking like an ordinary person, putting them in an extraordinary event and letting them shine through, not because they change themselves to better reflect the greater than life people, but because they're just taking what they're good at already and just attributing that. Sam is already
like that.
a very dedicated young man, who's, he and Frodo, they, I don't mean this in a romantic way, but they do love each other. I think it's a familial love there. And it's not that, Sam does show off some nice heroism at the end with like a blade, but for most of the story,
but he had to work to get there. Yeah.
For most of the story, Sam's superpower, I put in air quotations, is that he's not turning away from Frodo. He's not, he's going to stay by his side. And that's something that everybody can do.
Totally. Absolutely. And I think you really hit on the main idea of, I think, the virtue that comes from Hobbits pre-adventure. Because we look at Hobbits post-adventure, and they almost are these otherworldly heroes scouring the Shire, but we'll get to that. I think the pre-adventure virtue of Hobbits is, as you say, they are innately good at particular things, and then they use those things to their advantage, whether it's gardening, cooking and making food, making ale, growing pipeweed, or even being stealthy, right? And being able to, right, have Gandalf come in and be like, oh, you are just naturally stealthy compared to the big folk and anyone else. So we're going to use that. And so in a sense, we get virtue from skill. In real life, right, we do tie virtue to skill, or at least to dedication to skill. And that's what's funny. That's why this is a dichotomy to me, is because hobbits are simultaneously lazy and not the most skillful. Like, they can't swim, they can't boat, they can't, go on adventures, things like that. They're not the most skillful innately compared to like a Dunedain ranger. Nor are they always wanting to become more skillful, yet we still see them as virtuous. And I think a lot of that comes from, do we see children as virtuous? Because hobbits are very like children in their minds, in their morals, in their ethics, and things like that. And we do, in real life, see like children, right? Most children as virtuous, if not like all children, because of the innocence aspect.
Yeah.
And I think of the potentiality for them to become greater and to push themselves further. And that's where, so you mentioned prophecy. And generally speaking, Tolkien throws that out, but not quite. There's still some of it. It's really interesting because it really, when you were talking about it, it like sparked all of this memory in my mind about the prophecy of Aragorn, which is buried deep in the lore. It comes from this character named Malbeth the Seer of Arnor. And he made two prophecies, one concerning Arvedui, the last king, and one concerning Aragorn II. He, right, according to what I've been able to find, right, he said about Aragorn, over the land there lies a long shadow, westward reaching wings of darkness. The tower trembles, to the tomb of kings doom approaches. The dead awaken, for the hour has come for the oath breakers. At the stone of Erech they shall stand again, and hear there a horn in the hills ringing. Whose shall the horn be? Who shall call them from the grey twilight, the forgotten people? The heir of him to whom the oath they swore. From the north shall he come, need shall drive him, he shall pass the door to the paths of the dead. And so there is at least one oath, or one prophecy rather, about him at one point in his life, calling upon his kingly power, calling upon the oath breakers, and so forth. And again, that kind of person is way beyond, like you said, way beyond what your average everyday person is like. We are much closer as human beings to maybe not hobbits, maybe we were as children, but maybe more like Brelanders, just your prancing pony-esque people,
Pretty standard dude.
Yeah. Barlam and Butterbur type beat, for sure. Exactly. And so we're pretty standard, but I think what's interesting, and this is where you get the other side of virtue as Tolkien portrays it, right? We have the Hobbit side, but the other side is the Aragorn, and I always reference this, him going out there, becoming the hardiest of men and all that kind of stuff, because it's not just enough to have a prophecy that you're living up to, but to actually try to live up to your potential. And I think that's what's always been inspiring about those kinds of virtuous characters to me, is Aragorn, like, he could have been this arrogant guy, oh, I'm the descendant of kings, and oh, this and that. And there was a time where he thought kind of maybe about being like that, but then he immediately encountered Arwen and was like, oh, your lineage is way back, like way more powerful than mine. Like, in comparison to your elven lineage, mine is not like that, you know? And so then he was like, well, I have to still be worthy of that. And not only worthy of that, but worthy of Arwen. And so I'm going to go get my grind set and go out there and become who I'm meant to be. And the interesting thing is, it's like hobbits followed that. It becomes less of a dichotomy when hobbits actually end up following closer to that throughout their adventures. Tolkien always remarks that their bellies became smaller, that their belts became tighter, and that they were able to start doing things that they weren't at the beginning of their adventure, and that they had this courage. So they jump from one sense of Tolkien's virtue, which is they're hobbits in a far-off land, isolated from the world, and they have everything, and they're good people, and it's not almost sinful sloth, but it's virtuous sloth. You have that kind of... they work hard in their fields and in their gardens, but they work hard on fulfilling things to them, and then they just chill. Right? You have that sense of virtue, and then you have the Aragorn, Frodo post-adventure, Hobbits post-adventure sort of virtue. And that's where I'm also going to toss it back to you as well, Royen. So we got our 4 hobbits after most of the events of The Lord of the Rings. They come back for the scouring of the Shire, right? How would you say their virtue, their heroism is it much similar to where they were at the beginning, or is it far more similar to your Aragorn types?
I think it's from a point of perspective. I think that the 4 hobbits, when they return, are compared to the hobbits that are living there. Yeah, they are the greatest of hobbitry. Legendary figures. They are leaders. They become the things that they followed out, because that's what the hobbits did. Is they followed these great characters across the world, and then when they came back, they became those great characters. And yeah, but still, I wouldn't bet on any of them against Aragorn.
No. Yeah. That's fair.
But that's not the point.
That's fair.
That's not the point of it. But that is another huge theme of not just Tolkien, but also, storytelling in general. Yeah. Is that the journey makes you greater than when you began. Yeah. And so
and I guess that's the message, right? That's always the message, is hobbits who were almost like the least in shape of characters you could imagine, the least willing to go on the adventures. Even them, when they embraced it, became great heroes. So imagine, right, we as people in real life, if we go on the adventures, if we do the things that are difficult, push ourselves through horrible situations that are horrible and so forth, right? Even if we don't put ourselves there, but are put in bad situations. Kind of like Frodo getting captured, in Cirith Ungol. It's like he needed to be there to destroy the ring because that was better than the Black Gate, but at the same time, he certainly didn't choose to be captured. And you're in those situations, so how you get out forges you into your Aragorn type of character. Maybe not quite on his degree, because he's still always that upward aim. Aragorn really hit the peak humankind, right? Yeah. But you can get somewhere close. And I think that's where it's like, as I get older, and I've seen this across the internet too, as I get older, Boromir speaks to me more, Turin Turambar speaks to me more. Like, these characters that are fundamentally flawed in some ways, they're arrogant or they're brash or something like that, but they have their hearts in the right place, and despite their evil deeds, they still try to do the best that they can. I think that's still inspirational, because it's almost somewhere between those two parts of the dichotomy. They aren't the Aragorn. They aren't super wise and strong beyond belief and of this, just different build. Boromir, they kind of are, but they still fundamentally struggle. And then they're not like hobbits either. They're not these innocent children type people. They're not these wonderful, peaceful folk. They're somewhere in between. They're war-torn. They're a little depressed sometimes. They go through it, you know?
Yeah, they go through it. They do go through it.
They go through it, and then they come out the other side. And so it's just really interesting because it shows how multifaceted Tolkien's sense of virtue and heroism is. And I think the older I get, because I've just grown up with, we've both grown up with this series, the more complex that I understand how he wrote virtue was. It's not just about everybody's going to be like Gandalf and everybody's going to be wise and strong and they're just going to get there. They're going to get there like Aragorn and Faramir and all that. It's like, no, maybe with some characters like Boromir and Turin, the best you can hope for is that, you know, they save some people, even though they may have lost some of their own fights to the darkness, but that they come out in the light at the end. So, yeah, with Hobbits, it's really fascinating because it's almost like they had the greatest potential of growth out of any sort of character for that sense of heroism and virtue. But, yeah, Royen, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I do, actually. It's not necessarily tied to the last points that you were touching on, but something that I think is that I just want to mention is that this is more, I guess, in my own mind, and I'm going to assume that other people think similarly, just based on the kind of feedback that I've seen on the internet and things like that. When you have like an ensemble cast of heroes, I'm trying to think of like the Avengers. Okay. I think that people innately there might be a leader that is greater than all the others, but they really seem to want all of those characters to be on the same like playing field. They all want them to be approximately equal in their heroism. And that's just not realistic. And so I think that Tolkien, I don't know if he was intentionally doing this because of, you know, how this story predates a lot of the ones that I'm thinking of as examples. But the Fellowship of the Ring is innately full of the people who are, you know, carrying the team on their back and then the people who are being carried. And that is okay because that's how life works. You have the people that carry, you know, all projects, all things that happen. You have a couple people that usually do the most amount of work and then the people that are helped along in those works. And I think what should be strived for and what Tolkien put his effort into is that the people that are being carried the first time can come back and carry the next time. And that's what we see.
Totally.
We see the Hobbits, you know, more specifically Merry and Pippin, I guess, for like the first half of the War of the Ring, at least, are almost a complete liability.
Yeah, that's fair.
But, you know, they get their moments, they get their developments, and then at the end of the story, they are right there. They're right there as the heroes of their people. And I think that's something that everybody can strive to be. And, you know, if you're looking around in your life and you're feeling like everybody around you is greater than you, first of all, I'm just gonna say that's probably not true, and that's probably, you know, a figment of your own observation and potential, like, you know, you know what I'm saying. But even if that is true, that doesn't mean you can't be the guy next time or the girl or whoever. to carry the load next time, right? Yeah.
And to do what you need to do. Because you're absolutely right. I mean, by the time they came back with the Scouring, it was like Merry and Pippin were the ones you did not want to mess with. They were commanding like not armies of hobbits, but close.
Close as it gets for hobbits.
As close as it gets for hobbits, totally. And they were literally their knights in shining armor. One of Rohan, one of Gondor. Then you have Sam, who's just like, you know, don't mess with his people. Don't mess with his group. Don't mess with his family. Don't mess with his Rosie Cotton. And like, he'll leave you alone. And then you've got Frodo, who's like, I won't need to touch a sword again for the rest of this war. I've ascended. So they are all in just these very high mindsets of, very end of story arc kind of mindsets, which is always cool to see. And so I totally agree with you, Royen. I think maybe the message of kind of this topic and maybe this video is even if you're struggling, even if you're kind of going through it or you feel like it's, you're in a helpless situation or something like that, keep pushing forward, set those goals, hit those goals, do what you need to do to grow, because people will be relying on you in the future, just like they were with our hobbits. If they had not grown, the Scouring of the Shire would not have been overthrown. Saruman would have kept power there and probably driven the hobbits to extinction. But because they were willing to undergo all the stuff that they went through, facing down the Witch King, escaping from the Uruk-hai, doing all this stuff, fighting at the Black Gate, because they were able to do those things, they were able to carry those who needed them later. And so I suppose that's the message we walk away with. Royen, thank you so much for joining me for this today. Yeah. I really appreciate it.
Hey, this was awesome. A nice thing to do here on a good Sunday afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Always great to have you. My friends, if you would like to hear more conversations like this, please consider helping out the channel, joining our Patreon and our YouTube memberships. I want to say we have 60-something podcasts at this point. We've been doing them monthly for
years.
Over 5 years now. So, yeah. So thank you so much for watching. Happy Hobbit Day, my friends. Really fast, thanks to our Valar tier patrons and YouTube members: Peter Sheppard, Blair Scouten, Merten, John Hume, Elizabeth Calvert, Maz Gibs, Rhys Jenkins, Arthur Merlin, Dale Davis, Kingswald Project, Robert Bogue, Theodore, and Moon Viper. Thank you so much to all of our patrons and YouTube members. And my friends, thank you so much to all of you for joining us on this adventure. Until the next one.